This is a story about a moth that lived in Australia. One day it decided to hop across the ditch to find a better place to live. The moth found a cozy new home in a small industrial area in West Auckland. People weren't thrilled when the moth was discovered in its new home eating fruit trees. People thought they might cause a whole lot of trouble by being an economic threat to New Zealand's valuable horticulture sector. Officials from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, known as Moth, heard about this new resident. A month later, they decided they should come to pay the moths a visit. They came, and they went. Back in Wellington, they began to think about what to do. They finally realised the moth was a painted apple moth, or PAM for short. An experienced independent scientist approached the ministry and offered to help catch this alien invader by producing a synthetic pheromone that acts like a perfume to attract and trap male moths. However, the ministry said, no thanks, and brought in their own scientist, who had no prior experience developing pheromones. They never successfully developed a pheromone for PAM. The ministry knew that the PAM females couldn't fly. However, they failed to realize it could hop, and boy could it hop, over 300 meters per hop. The females also could lay up to 700 eggs in one clutch, and had several clutches a year, which means a whole load more moths could end up hopping around Auckland. Another group of scientists in the Forest Research Institute offered to establish at no cost a breeding colony of infertile moths to aid trapping. Sounds like a good deal, right? No. The ministry told them to go away and yet again contracted others that didn't have much experience breeding infertile moths. Suddenly the moths were being discovered in other areas of Auckland. The ministry removed them successfully with ground spraying using an organophosphate pesticide. Not nice. Buoyed by this success, the ministry was optimistic that they could remove PAM from West Auckland. So they quietly tried to do this, and waited, and waited, and waited to see if they were successful. 1 year later, a whole pile of moths were found in a trap in West Auckland. The ministry came under a lot of criticism. The public said they weren't doing a good job. The scientist who had his offer to develop the pheromone rejected, questioned the ministry's competency. The media expressed disapproval and covered stories by a range of interest and sector groups, scientists and the local West Auckland Council all criticising the ministry. However, the ministry continued because an international investigation said their program was appropriate. Soon the community learnt that the government was considering eradicating PAM by aerial spraying using a biological insecticide BTK, or better known as Foray 48B. This spray was used internationally to sporadically control moths, but not often to eradicate them. The ingredients of the spray were kept secret due to commercial privacy laws, which made many people nervous. The community didn't want aerial spraying, and so they created an advisory group. The ministry did not engage with this unofficial group. Later in the year, the ministry decided to hold a public meeting. The people at the meeting were very angry. An official community advisor group was appointed from people in the audience. When aerial spraying finally was scheduled to begin nearly 2 years after the moth was first discovered, the ministry faced problem after problem. The aircraft had issues, the weather wasn't good enough, they couldn't fly as close as they'd like to the ground because of minimum aircraft height restrictions. The delays just kept coming, and the moths kept spreading. The government used special emergency provisions of the Biosecurity Act to overrule planning issues to allow the spray planes to fly close to the ground. As the moth had spread, the ministry decided to increase the spray zone to cover 5,000 houses. This was 5 times more houses than in the original zone. Complaints from the public and criticism from the media, industry groups, scientists and local government were constant. In addition, a government audit report was critical of the ministry's communication and handling of the program. This led to the project's chief scientist stepping down and a new person was appointed as the head of the PAM management team. But the government was still afraid that if not eradicated, PAM might cause substantial economic damage to New Zealand's forestry and horticulture sectors, so they decided to increase their budget from an original $10 million to a whopping $90 million. Aerial spraying finally began, but the moth population kept growing. The spray zone kept expanding, eventually covering 40,000 homes, 26 times the original amount. Hot zones, where moths were really prevalent, received extra spraying both aerially and on the ground. But the public of West Auckland were not happy and blamed the ministry for their poor management. To win back public support, the ministry launched a major advertising campaign called Wipe Out Painted Apple Moth, which focused on the need to eradicate the moth to reassure the public about the safety of the spray. They made hats, t-shirts, glasses, and all sorts of merchandise to win the public over. But it didn't work. At the same time, the relationship between the Community Advisory Group and the ministry became so strained that the ministry eventually fired their advisory group. The spray program began to gain success and eventually continued only occasionally in the hot zones for another 2 years. In the later stages of the program, there was a lot of media focus on the safety of the spray. In particular, there was concern about the possible long-term side effects of the aerosol used to deliver the spray. The ministry delayed their release of a report by the Wellington School of Medicine about possible long-term effects. However, the Ministry of Health was satisfied that the spraying was safe and the side effects were likely psychosomatic. Eventually, the spraying stopped. 4 years later, the ministry was finally able to declare that the painted apple moth was officially eradicated. The war was won, but at what cost?